Hello everybody, how are you doing? Hope you are doing well. We are in the middle of July here in Hong Kong. I wasn't actually going to do a video for July, but something struck me that I thought I would talk about that isn't my usual stuff, but more on that in a minute. Here in Hong Kong, it is very much holiday season. People are going away because it's too hot here. It's like 34, 35, 36 degrees Celsius with massively high 80, 90% humidity, 95, sometimes it's awful. So it's a bit like swimming around in the heat, if you can get that idea. If you've never been here, you probably can't understand what it's like, but it can be a bit grim. And I don't normally do much because not normally happens in the technology world during July. There's a lot of stuff going on in AI actually. AI Act in EU is being criticised for not being specific enough, but we will see how that goes. But I'm going to do something different because it is sort of holiday season. I'm going to talk about something that's not particularly a hot topic, not necessarily something that's in the news, but something that's quite close to my heart. Now, I am a huge fan of physical media. I collect vinyl records, which are a very heavy way and very cumbersome way to listen to music. I love collecting films. I like my films on physical media, such as this one, and there are some behind me which you probably can't see because I probably blurred the background. And I like physical books and comic books. Now, I live in Hong Kong where there isn't much space, which means my hobbies, things that I'm into, are a bit of a foolish thing. Oh, video games too. I like physical versions of those more than I admit. But also, I am used to doing streaming, and people often mock me for having physical media, saying, well, I suppose you're a cumbersome lawyer sort of person, so therefore you like physical books and things, but why do you have all this stuff when you can just stream it? And let's face it, most people now are massively into streaming. Streaming is great. You tend to have to subscribe to more than one streaming platform to get everything you want, so I subscribe to probably 3 or 4, and I watch quite a lot of content on that, but if I can, if it's something I like, I will try and buy a physical copy. Now that is because when you have a streaming service, essentially, you probably know how this works already, but in case you don't, whatever is on the streaming service is licensed by the content provider. So suppose, for example, this particular film, 28 Days Later, the copyright holder of this will essentially be licensing it to a particular streaming platform for people to watch, and people will watch it, and if the streaming license goes, for some reason the license is revoked or it expires, the content will go off that platform. That's why you have a list of things that are or aren't available on Netflix at any given time, or aren't on Disney Plus or Paramount or any of the other streaming services. Shudder, I'm trying to think of ones off the top of my head, there are so many. Amazon has their own one too. That's why things come and go, and some things are not accessible. And obviously a lot of time in my hands because it's summer, watching videos about physical media told me that this film, 28 Days Later, is quite hard to get hold of. It's not on streaming services. It means the cost of this Blu-ray, which apparently is now relatively hard to get hold of, and I haven't even opened it yet, is quite hard to find. And there's a increased, I guess, attention to 28 Days Later because we've got a film coming out 28 years later, the second sequel, which I'm quite excited about too, even though I know nothing about it. But it means that people can't watch the original one. Now, I'm sure someone will license it, it will appear on streaming in good time. But it made me think about how licensing and how all the physical media we consume is not necessarily something that's permanent anymore. It becomes intangible. There are things that you can't see. Now, licensing, for those who don't know what it is, it's basically where you get a right to do something with something. It's the most simple way to it. You license somebody to do something with something. So you license somebody to take your film and put it on a streaming platform or release it on a disc. You take your music, allow someone, license them to essentially produce it on vinyl, produce it on CD, put it on a streaming service, put it on Spotify or Tidal or any of the Apple Music or any of the many streaming platforms that are available. And when that license expires, then the material goes away from that platform. When the license expires for something that's physical, well, they can take away the license, but they can't necessarily take away the physical product. It's not like the streaming service or the person I bought this from is going to come back into my house and take it off from me, unless, of course, I get burgled. But it isn't. I suppose that is possible. But essentially, you will own this forever, provided you've got the medium to play it on. Whereas something streaming, you don't. You're renting things, and you are literally just renting whatever you are watching at any time. You're paying a subscription that allows you to have access to something. When the subscription goes or something disappears off the service, it is gone. You cannot access it anymore. And as a collector of something like physical media, that's a bit weird. I like the idea of having a library, of having stuff that I can see at any point. Maybe it's too much time in law libraries where you're surrounded by dusty old books, which is what I was doing when I was a student. It gives me this sort of romantic notion of it. But the thing is, physical media, which I love, is sort of in a bit of a decline. There's been a bit of a resurgence with the realization that films are becoming more hard to get hold of. I've seen lots and lots of videos of this, I said, and certainly vinyl records have had a massive resurgence. It's the most inconvenient of formats. Arguably sounds the best, but that's a whole kettle of fish I'm not going to go anywhere near. But it does take up a heck of a lot of space, and when you're in a small apartment in Hong Kong, you end up having to rent a bigger space just to store your vinyl, which is expensive, costly, and as people say to me, why don't you just use Spotify? Well, it's because they don't pay the artists very well, but that's another topic for another subject. But there are things now that you just cannot access without using essentially digital products, digital services. So I'm a gamer, as well as liking physical media, as well as liking comic books, as well as liking books, as well as liking films, as well as liking music. I am a gamer. I was horribly addicted to, and probably still am slightly horribly addicted to Cyberpunk 2077, even though that's still quite an old game at this point. But I always love, and I still have a lot of my old cartridges for a lot of my Nintendo systems, a lot of my discs for the various PlayStation iterations, the Xbox that I've had, even my Dreamcast games. I still have them either in storage or somewhere in my apartment. And occasionally I will plug everything in. It can be more difficult depending on what the connections are these days, and I will play those games and I will enjoy them. I could emulate them, I suppose, but there's some legal restrictions on that, I suppose. But I like having the actual physical product and the physical thing. But being a gamer as well means that I'm a PC gamer. I mentioned Cyberpunk, which means that very few PC games these days get a physical release, and therefore that sort of product, that tangible medium that I have is no longer there. It's literally a digital file that I can download and play with whatever I want. Similar to having, if you're not streaming, if you're buying music on a music service, unless they're giving you the physical file, unless there's no digital rights management on that file, then you're potentially streaming it till you're streaming it, but you bought it, but you're still essentially only able to play it subject to the rights of the license. So whenever you buy something, even when you buy a physical product, you'll be subject to a license. Now, I use the example of a film. You'll remember the copyright notice at the beginning of a film. If you buy something for home use, I remember these when I was a kid. You're not allowed to show it on oil rigs, it's not for public performance and so on. That's what the license is. You have a license to watch the film on the disc. But again, if the license expires, they won't come and take away the disc from you. If you show it on an oil rig, unless they find out and decide to prosecute you, they're not going to come to your house and take the disc off you and take you to court. Well, maybe they will, who knows. But with digital goods, where they do have rights management embedded in them. So if you're using a platform such as, say, Steam or the Epic Game Store even, not good old games, which is GOG, because that one that you get, once you've downloaded the files, you've got the files forever, as long as you have downloaded the files. They're all subject rights. You can only play a game on Steam as long as you're logged into Steam and you authorize. And it made me think a lot about what's going to happen when these licenses change. So when the license to have something goes, the license to have a show on Netflix vanishes, it vanishes, but you're only subscribing to the service. What if you've actually bought a product? What happens to it then? And this bothers me because I have a lot of games on Steam, which is the Valve's gaming system, probably the most dominant one in terms of gaming platform in terms of PC users. I have a lot of games that I've bought on PlayStation Network, on Xbox Live. I still have access, I think, to most of them. But when games get delisted or things no longer have the rights to play them and download them because the rights holders either changed or decide to revoke those rights, what do you do then? And the problem is nothing. You're kind of powerless. You're kind of in this position whereby because you've licensed to use something and that license can be taken away, it will state in the license terms that it is revocable. It may say that it expires at a certain point. In the case of some services, they may say that it's non-transferable. This is important. What happens when that goes? And I don't think we as a society have really thought this through. I think media's become so disposable that we just watch something. I think maybe we're responsible for some reason with some of the issues with how nobody goes to the cinema anymore. It's so disposable that we look at it and then it goes away and we don't really care. But if we're trying to preserve things, what happens? All my games on my Steam library, as an example, I have plenty of them. I've got a bit of a Steam backlog, I have to say. What happens to them, for example, if the rights holder goes? Now, Steam's pretty good. If a game is delisted from Steam and you bought it, it's still accessible. But what happens when I die? Suppose I die, I'm going to leave my Steam game collection to a third party. I leave it in a will. Well, technically, under the terms of service, it's not transferable. I think Steam actually came out recently and said that it's not even transferable on death and you can't leave it to someone. So what do I do then? Now, you could argue, well, don't worry about it. You could just give them the passwords, and there's a thing called a digital will, which I recommend you look into. I won't do a video just on that because it's a bit of a morbid subject, but this is where you give access to everyone in terms of your digital, like your photo libraries, your email accounts, all of your digital goods that you own. They can be transferred to to another person just by giving the login details. That's quite a good idea. But I think Steam came out relatively recently and said, well, sorry, if you die, your Steam library is not transferable. All of those games have gone. And frankly, I've got such a backlog I'm never going to play. That means nobody will ever play some of those games that I've got in my library, which is a bit of a depressing thing. And is that really fair? It's odd that we as a society become used to paying essentially for something we don't own. It's a kind of a challenge, the way that we would have bought goods within my lifetime. I mean, I grew up in the late 70s and the 80s, where if you had something, you owned it, and that was it, you owned it forever. That has really changed, and I find it odd how we've become used to that. And I don't know whether we've really thought of the repercussions. We also haven't thought about how things change and become inaccessible. So for example, Disney have been editing things on their Disney Plus platform for some time, but also Disney's removed content that it's a bit embarrassed about. Song of the South, which I think is quite an important film in terms of what it represents, if not a quite controversial one, that's really hard to get hold of now. It's not accessible on Disney Plus. It's pretty much been eradicated with that content warning. But I think it's important to show what was happening at the time in America when that film was made and what was considered acceptable. But you can't. It's basically impossible to get hold of unless you essentially illegally download it from somewhere or find a copy online. Someone's probably put it on YouTube as I speak, but there we are. But I find that worrying, and also that things can be changed without you knowing. Kanye West, for example, regularly changes albums which are available on streaming. I'm pretty sure other artists do that. I just find it all, this whole thing that things, we no longer have access to this media. There's a situation where you don't actually own anything, caused me a bit of a problem. So what can we do? I don't know. I mean, my view is download everything, make sure it's backed up everywhere, make sure you've got files and make sure you can access it, and then make sure you leave it to someone in a will if you want them to play it in the future, or that it's accessible by third parties. How do we preserve our digital history? But you can only do that if there's no rights attached to it, if you can actually access the files and use the files. Now, some may argue that, well, what are you saying? Chances are all the technology that you need it will be obsolete and nobody uses that. But I don't go with that, because people use old technology all the time. My old Game Boys still work, my old SNESes still work, all of that stuff is still fine. But what do we do in terms of the stuff that won't be accessible? So if you bought a load of stuff on Steam and it goes away, if you buy books to read on a Kindle through Amazon and they take away the access to those books, or they change the content of those books without your consent, which I believe has happened, what do you do then? How do we fight back? Honestly, I don't know, and I'm interested in what you think of this. It feels like at the moment we're going to a place where, and maybe this is intentional because we don't have space and we're bad for the planet, but we stream everything, everything's digital, but we don't actually own anything. You don't own copies of the books that you read, you don't own copies of the music that you listen to, you don't own copies of the films that you watch. And that kind of makes you really want to hang on to stuff like this, become a bit of a hoarder. Maybe one of those people you'll find buried under loads of stuff who ends up on TV when they open up this house and someone's died in it because it's been crushed under the weight of vinyl records. It makes me think. So yeah, interested what your views on this. Not much law in this at all, apart from the fact that licensing is quite nefarious, and you should always read the license whenever you buy something and subscribe to a platform. Guarantee that you don't, even I don't, and I'm a lawyer, but chances are you'll find that the things that you're buying you haven't really bought at all. You've just got a right to use them. It can be revoked. Sometimes it will, but certainly upon your death, and certainly when the access to that particular thing becomes impossible by the right holder. But there we go. Just a thought for holiday time. Nothing particularly important. Or maybe it is. Maybe when we can't find that one song that we want to listen to on repeat all the time, because it reminds us of something when we were growing up, because it's gone from a streaming platform, we don't have a physical copy of it, and we can't play a guitar or sing very well. Maybe then we'll be very wistful, sort of the old ways where everything came on vinyl. To put it this way, I've got some records in my collection from when my parents were young, when they were kids. And you know, I cherish them. Some are a bit bashed up. My dad's love of country, my mum's love of Dusty Springfield. But the fact that I still have those and they're still accessible for me, that's kind of an important thing, and it kind of preserves our heritage. But anyway, a wistful end to a slightly rambling video, but hope you're doing well. I'll be back probably with more AI stuff, given that seems to be the only thing that's in the news. But I'll be back with more technology stuff rather than this. Actually, no, this was a technology thing because streaming media is technology. I'll be back with more technology stuff relatively soon after the summer, which will probably be in August. But in the meantime, have a brilliant summer, whatever you are doing, and I will see you very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.